to honor Abraham Lincoln. I mean, it's been done before. Where would be the best place to build the church? What if you built it right on top of the place where Abraham Lincoln was born? That's what these Byzantine people did. They found where people had been visiting. You got to remember, when Jesus died on the cross, it changed everything. Colossians 1:23 says the gospel went to everyone under heaven. People were making homages to the Holy Land from the get-go. Where did he die? Where was he resurrected? Where did he go back into heaven? Where did he preach? Where did he live? So under this church, they have found a first century house. But then on top of that house, where that house was, they found a makeshift church that had plastered walls in it. And on the plastered walls were things like, to Jesus our Lord. And then, of course, they come up with this octagonal building. This is before the church was built, so you can see they've got some pretty good pictures that'll last through the years. But here's what it looks like now. But they said on this inner part here would have been where the Christians met around the 4th century. In fact, they say it would have been not long after Jesus ascended to heaven that they just started worshiping there in that location. That's why scholars believe that they actually have found the home where Peter lived, and they say Jesus lived there as well. Now, it doesn't have 122 Jesus Lane, you know. Capernaum's not that big. But when you go there and you see this and you know the history, there is some really strong evidence that they've actually found the place where he lived. One thing I had to remember when I was over there is the fact that if he didn't live here, he lived somewhere very, very close to here. So, a little part of archaeology that helps us to see the validity of Christianity from outside the Bible. That's really what archaeology is all about. Now let's jump down to verse 13. It says, or verse, let's see, I'm over here in chapter 3. Verse 13, he went out again beside the sea. I think about Jesus going out beside the sea. When I stood there and looked at the Sea of Galilee, I just thought about seeing Jesus walking, what it would have been like. If you saw Jesus walking by the sea, what would you do? When he went out beside the sea, all the crowd was coming to him. They were doing what Scott would do if I saw Jesus walking by the sea. They were coming to him. What does Jesus do when people come to him? Well, one of two things. He either heals them, he's going to do a little of that. He's done a lot of that already. But what does he really want to do?
Teach them.
He wants to teach them. He wants to tell them things that will help them to know what he's like, what he's all about, and what their hope is in him. And so, as he passed by, it says that he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, "Follow me." And he rose, and he followed him. And as he reclined at the table in his house, and we would assume he's talking about Levi's house. Matthew seems to be a little clearer in defining that many tax collectors and sinners were reclining with Jesus and his disciples, for they were many who followed him. And the scribes and the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners tax collectors, said to his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" And when Jesus heard it, he said to them, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." A couple things to notice about Levi. Levi is the Hebrew word for the Greek word, which is Matthew. Matthew. So Matthew is who he's talking about. Matthew is the tax collector. He's sitting in the booth. You know, I've wondered, in the proximity here, he's out around the sea. Why would Levi be out at the sea?
Because that's where the people are.
Where the people are? What else goes on at the sea, yeah? Trade. What is Capernaum?
Fishing.
It's a fishing village. And these guys are not just out there wetting hooks just to fill their freezer. What are they out there for? They're trying to that's their living. So they're out there selling. So have you ever gone in a store and you bought an item and then you got to the checkout and all of a sudden you found out that for that item you also paid a little bit more to help the government? That's what Levi did. He was the guy that walked around to see. So why Levi? Why a tax collector? Why did he call him to follow him? Why do you think? He could change anybody. Yeah, I think you're right. I think he called him because he thought he could change anybody. He also thought that everybody needs to see that this gospel is for everybody. It's not just for the chief priest. It's not for the Nicodemuses of this world. Not just for the Joseph of Arimatheas.
Not just for the good guys.
Not for the good guys.
You know, Levi was collecting taxes for the Romans, and they hated that. They hated the idea that their money was going back to Rome, and they didn't want it to be that way. Levi's collecting for them, and now Jesus calls him, and it's like as though you've picked the worst group of people that you could possibly talk to. Why would you ever do anything with them? Why would you for sure not go eat with them? Don't you eat with them? That's horrible, you know. But I think Jesus is really showing us that he comes for everyone. And then when he tells them about the physician, you know, that the physician, it's not the well people. In reality, he's going to show them that nobody's well, spiritually. They all need Jesus.
I'm reading a book on leadership. It's written by Kirk Brothers. He's the president of Heritage Christian University. And so in this book, he talks about Jesus in the sense of his compassion. And he makes reference to this verse. He told this story about when he was in high school, that part of their kind of when they graduated and what was going to end up in the yearbook were these funny little things that they had chosen to represent them in, like, you know, most likely to succeed, most likely to, you know, and he said we would have jokes and everything, and he said, I got, this is funny because he's a doctor and a president of a university. He said, what they presented to me is a frame picture that said, most likely to be a garbage collector. And so that was funny. It's funny to us. But the point he made in this is, he said, I've always kept it down through the years. And it's reminded me. I've kept it for no other reason than to remind me that Jesus, in fact, is the biggest garbage collector that's ever lived on this earth. Do you believe that? The biggest garbage collector ever. He was with the garbage. Sat with the garbage. He dined with the garbage.
The people that no one else wanted to be associated with.
Yeah.
It's amazing the fact that every one of us, I don't think we take enough opportunities to really associate with people that need us the most. We have a tendency to associate with those who love us, those that like us, those that we worship with, those who we're friends with. But there's a world full of people out there that are struggling, and we tend to pass them by.
I think of Jesus as looking for opportunities. And there's so many things that he stumbles into, or it appears that he stumbles into, that I'm sure there's some foresight that goes along with it. But he is a master at dealing with whatever the situation happens, or whatever happens with him. He fully knew that he was going to eat with Levi. And he knew that he was going to end up collecting other people along the path. And he saw it again as an opportunity to make a difference in their lives. And so, now, verse 16 says that when the Pharisees, when they saw that he was eating with sinners. Now, I've got a graphic here that I found online of what it would look like. And if you've done very much research, they didn't sit at the table kind of like you and I sit at the table. In chairs, food on the table. They actually would lay down kind of in a semicircle, horseshoe type shape, and they would have a little raised table in the middle. And so a lot of times you hear about them lying at food or laying while they eat. So what they would do is they'd hike up on one arm, and they would be close to each other. We've seen this picture. I don't know who was it that painted the picture of the upper room.
Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah, and they're all sitting by a table.
Yeah, Leonardo told them, everybody get over there and let's take a picture.
That's what he did.
That's sort of the way that looks like. It looks like everybody's posed. Leonardo says, let's take a picture. And so he begins. And of course, he wasn't there.
It was a Kodak.
It's many years later when he paints that.
Yes, and so, but really that's kind of where they were. And so I show that to think, when we're talking about Jesus eating with these people, this is more intimate. They're practically laying on each other.
It is really communing with each other. You are having an interaction here with each other. And if you remember, when Peter and John are discussing who's Jesus talking about that's going to be the one that betrays us, Peter tells John, he says, you ask him, he'll tell you. And you can get the mental picture that Jesus is actually, or John is actually reclining there next to Jesus.
Right. So they're reclining at the table. But it's interesting that the Pharisees know it. I don't know if they're eating outside. I don't know if it's in a courtyard. I don't know why Pharisees would be there. But they see this. And to me, again, that seems to be more of an orchestrated plan. So if they're eating outside near the front gate or kind of out in front of the people who are walking up and down the streets, it would be the perfect opportunity for the passerby. Because I don't see the Pharisees wanting to be there. So I'm just trying to visualize what would it be like for the Pharisees to be there and to see the scribes of the Pharisees when they saw that he was eating with the sinners and the tax collectors said, why does he eat with them? And of course Jesus again, he says, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I came not to call the righteous but sinners. What is Jesus saying when he says, I came not to call the righteous but sinners? What is he actually saying about himself? That he was sent from heaven. That his work, I'm here to call sinners. What? Shouldn't that have already told them what his mission was? I'm not here to hang out with the good guys, the rich guys, the wealthy.
The Pharisees.
The Pharisees.
You know, I also think there when he says that, I came not to call the righteous, is he's really telling them, none of you are righteous.
Exactly.
None of you are righteous. Everyone has sinned. All men have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Everyone needs to come to the Lord. He says, I didn't come for that guy who says, I'm perfect. I don't need anything else.
Right.
And you know, that's probably the Pharisees' biggest problem, is they really thought they didn't need anything else. They had it all figured out. They knew what they wanted. They knew where they were. They had their position of authority. We're going to stay right here. That's why they missed the Messiah.
Yeah. When I see the word righteous, I think of the words, I put in the words, think they are righteous.
Self-righteous.
I didn't come for those who think they're righteous.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm putting words in the Lord's mouth. Do you? I mean, can you see that, or does that make sense to you? But I'm here but to call sinners. And so this makes his mission spiritual. Later, he's going to be defending himself before the Roman governor, and he's going to have to say, my kingdom is not of this world. It's never been about this world. All the way back at the very beginning, back there in Mark 2, I told him I was here for sinners. I'm not here for the successful and the great and the wonderful. He pronounced who he was here for from the very beginning. So we see that in Jesus. Any other comments about this section?
Doesn't the sinner, though, become the righteous by following Jesus?
Absolutely.
Just as he said unto Levi, he said, come follow me. And it always amazes me when he does it with James and John, when he does it with Peter and Andrew, and now when he does it with Levi. You know, Levi gets up from the booth where he's collecting taxes, and he follows him. He just, now, I'm like what I remember you said the other night. They'd had more exposure than this. They had seen Jesus for a while. It's not just this guy walks by and says, follow me.
And he goes, oh, okay. like a. Yes.
Yeah. Preparing the way.
The Savior's coming. And John even proclaimed, behold, the Son of God, the Savior.
But when Levi follows him, he goes from being the sinner to the righteous. That may take a while, but he still is going to go there. And those who follow him, those who would put him on in baptism, those who have their sins washed away, they become the righteous. Not by what they do, but what Jesus does.
Okay, let's move on into the next section. Throw my graphic up there again. Well, no, I guess that I didn't have one for that. So in verse 18 it says, now John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. And people came and said to him, "Why do John's disciples and the disciples of the Pharisees fast, but your disciples do not fast?" And Jesus said to them, "Can the wedding guests fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast. The day will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in that day. No one sews a piece of unshrunk cloth on an old garment. If he does, the patch tears away from it, the new from the old, and a worse tear is made. And no one puts new wine in old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed, and so also are the skins. But new wine is for fresh wineskins." Okay, you explain this.
No, you know, Jesus, as he talks to him here, though, he's talking to him about this idea. And this idea of how that you are following him. And then as he goes on, he talks about that the concept of sewing a piece of cloth on. Now, I don't know if any of y'all are old enough, but we used to do this where we'd sew those on there, and then it'd shrink.
Patch on a jeans.
Yeah, and it'd shrink, it'd tear loose, because the other had already done all the shrinkage it was going to. And then, of course, in the wineskins, Jesus tells him, he says, "You know better than to pour new wine, which is not fermented yet, into an old wineskin, which has gotten hard, and it won't give any anymore." What you have to do, you got to pour new wine into new wineskins. It is a teaching of the methodology of Jesus. In that as you are someone now who is following, someone now who is listening, you can't carry that old baggage with you. You can't carry all that old baggage. You can't be following after Pharisees. To me, it's really interesting when he talks about the fasting. You know, I fast every day. I fast at least from between 12 and 2. So, I mean, you know, I understand the concept of fasting a lot. I've never, it really is something that I
Very
don't
spiritual,
understand.
spiritual fast.
It's, yeah. But as he talks to him about the idea and the concept of fasting,
Let me think.
it has to be with devotion.
Go ahead.
It has to be with devotion. This concept of what you're going to concentrate on, what you're going to devote.
Something came out to me when I compared verse 19. Jesus said to him, "Can the wedding feast fast while the bridegroom is with them? As long as if they have the bridegroom with them, they cannot fast." If you compare that to Matthew chapter 9's version, in verse 15, Matthew 9 and verse 15, he said, "And Jesus said to them, Can the wedding guests mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away, and then they cannot fast," or they will not fast. So Matthew says, when they mourn. Mark says, when they fast. Can the wedding guests fast? Why do people fast? Well, generally, why people fast? They fast because they're sad. You take a man who's been married to his wife for 50 years and she dies. And then days go by and the kids say, "Daddy, you got to eat something." "I can't. I'm not hungry." "Well, you're going to have to eat something. You got to keep your strength." "I'm sad." Unintentionally, he's fasting. Matthew gives the idea that wedding guests would not fast because there's no reason to be sad. Mark just says they fast. And we have to understand from that he means as long as Jesus is here, there's no reason to be sad. You have to, when you go back to the first century and you think about where these disciples were before Jesus came, they were looking for that Messiah to come. And for generations they're looking for him to come. And yet he never came. He never came. He never came. Finally he came. And so when Jesus is with his disciples, they are jubilant. They don't want to fast. And so I think when he says here in verse 19 that the wedding guests with the bridegroom there would no longer think of fasting than one would if he tried to put a new cloth into an old garment. No more would a person fast with the bridegroom there than he would to put new wine into old wineskins. I think he's just illustrating here. I think a lot of times these passages are used to find some sort of theological explanation about how Jesus is in some way overturing that he is more important than the Jews, or to try to connect it, some sort of theological thing. I'm not so sure he's doing anything like that. We don't have time to do it tonight, but in our class on Sunday morning, we have looked through the book of Zechariah here a few months ago, and sometime read Zechariah 7 verses 1 to 5 and chapter 8 and verse, 18 and 19. Because this was a period of time when the children of Israel were in the 70 years of captivity, where they proclaimed fasts because of terrible things they remembered happening in Jerusalem. And they had a fast in the 4th century, or the 4th month, and they'd have the fast in the 5th month, and fast in the 7th month, and a fast in the 10th month, and all for different reasons that they called. And God comes along and he asks them, why did you have these fasts? Did you do these fasts for me, or did you do those fasts for you? If you look back in the Old Testament, you will not find the word fast in the first 5 books. Moses never taught fasting per se. They interpreted it as fasting. From Leviticus chapter 16, on the Day of Atonement, they were to completely be devoid of anything. And so they saw, well, that means we can't eat. And so it was assumed out there. Today, have you ever heard of Yom Kippur?
Yeah.
Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement. It is the celebration. And a lot of Jews, even to this day, will not eat on the Day of Atonement. It's a fasting day. But go back and read in chapter 8 where God says, what's fixing to happen, and most people think it was messianic, what's going to happen when Jesus comes, he doesn't say Jesus there, but again, they think it's messianic, is that he's going to take these days that you have been fasting and he's going to turn them into feasts. When you have Jesus in the world, you're going to feast. You don't have anything to be sad about. You're not going to have anything to be down about. Not even the Day of Atonement is going to be important. Why? Because he is the atonement. He died on the cross, and he made it possible for you to have everlasting life. There will never, ever be a need for fasting if you have Jesus in your life. Now,
You know, Scott, I think that
Go ahead.
a lot of times I forget totally the idea that when Jesus is calling these new disciples, apostles, when all these people are following him, when he feeds multitudes, when he does all these things around there, these people aren't sad. I can imagine that at the time in which that Peter and Andrew and James and John and now Levi and the others, at night they had the opportunity to sit with Jesus and just listen to him and enjoy what he told them. You know, we sort of get the idea that this whole time was like they were doing some kind of penance and that they were looking for something bad to happen. That's why that later on, when they decide they're going back down to Judea, the apostles come immediately and tell him, no, Lord, let's stay here in Galilee because we got the numbers in Galilee. We got the friends in Galilee. We can rejoice in Galilee. But when we get back down to Jerusalem, the high priest and all of his power is down there, and they're against us.
Why do you think Jesus fasted? It's reported that he fasted in multiple places.
Well, it is recorded that the church fasted. In Acts chapter, was it 13, when Paul and Barnabas was going to be sent out to do work, the church at Antioch fasted. There was fasting that took place several times in the New Testament church. But as... Huh?
I don't think Jesus was sad every time he was fasting.
Um,
I wouldn't associate it. I think you got to be, I wouldn't put a blanket over that.
yeah,
And say that every time he was fasting, he had sadness.
right. Well, you're right. I think you're right. Generally, and that's what I'm...
I think it
Generally,
can
when
really-
you don't eat, you're...
But it really can be preparation time also. I think Jesus was preparing and preparing those who were with him a lot too. And what this is coming.
And I think that was why the way he words it in Matthew and the way he words it in Mark, Mark uses the word fast. Jesus uses the word in Matthew, weep?
Morning.
Mourn. And here again, I think he's just using this as an illustration as to why my disciples are not going to need to fast, because I'm here. And
then it's an example with the wineskins and the cloth and the silver
I think so
cloth
too.
there.
I think so too. But yeah, there were other reasons. There are several reasons in the Scripture that give why they would fast. But on this occasion, Jesus kind of compares it to mourning. And so I thought that was an interesting thing. Yes, in Matthew 6.
Don't cover your face up and all this like the Pharisees and all. Basically, if you're doing it, don't let anybody know you're doing it.
Right.
But if you do it private.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. I think that's our time. We'll start with verse 23.